The Iran ceasefire is over. Last night, U.S. Central Command struck more than 80 Iranian targets, and for the first time in this conflict, the military called what it was doing offensive strikes, not self-defense. The same night, the Trump administration revoked the oil sanctions waiver that was supposed to be Iran's main economic incentive under the MOU. Iran struck 85 U.S. military sites in Bahrain and Kuwait in retaliation. Sirens sounded in Bahrain for the third time by Wednesday morning. Kharg Island, which handles roughly 90% of Iran's crude oil exports, was hit. Meanwhile, across the world, Argentina beat Egypt in Atlanta in a highly controversial match marred by referee bias, though Messi was still tossed in the air by teammates in a moment CNN called sporting nirvana. And in Midtown Manhattan, a 37-story high-rise construction site has buckled columns, with the mayor confirming cracks and sagging floors. Let's take all three. Start with Iran, because what happened last night is not a continuation of the previous pattern. It is a different thing entirely. For the past 4 months, every U.S. military action in the region was described by CENTCOM using the language of self-defense or proportional response. Tuesday night's operation was described differently. Fox News, citing CENTCOM's own statement, reported that the military labeled Tuesday's strikes as offensive, a notable shift from the language it has used to characterize previous U.S. strikes in the region. Fox News' Liz Frieden noted the operation was roughly 8 times larger than the previous U.S. operation. The U.S. struck more than 80 Iranian targets, air defense systems, command and control networks, coastal radar sites, anti-ship missile capabilities, and more than 60 IRGC small boats in and near the strait. The strikes lasted approximately 4 hours. The trigger was Iran's attacks on 3 commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz between Monday and Tuesday. One was a Qatari LNG tanker that caught fire off the coast of Oman after being struck by what the UK Maritime Trade Operations Organization described as an unknown projectile. One was a Saudi-flagged crude oil tanker damaged by IRGC missiles, according to Reuters. A U.S. official confirmed both incidents to Fox News and called Iran's actions wholly unacceptable. The U.S. response was the strikes. The Treasury Department revoked the sanctions waiver it had granted Iran under the framework of the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding. The document signed at Versailles in late June, the 1.5-page general agreement that was supposed to begin 60 days of nuclear talks. That waiver was the primary economic incentive Iran received for entering the MOU. It allowed Iran to sell oil freely, lifting the blockade's commercial impact. Revoking it means millions of barrels of Iranian oil, as Fox News reported, are now left without a clear destination. The IRGC launched what it described as an initial retaliatory operation against 85 U.S. military sites in Bahrain and Kuwait. The Bahrain Interior Ministry sent sirens and evacuation alerts to residents for the third time Wednesday morning, according to CBS News' live updates. Kuwait's military said it was confronting hostile missile and drone attacks. Both countries had been targeted by Iran previously in this conflict. Iran's side of the legal argument deserves to be stated clearly, because it is specific and documented. Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister, Kazem Garibabadi, posted on social media, "The United States' action in revoking the waiver for the exemption of sanctions on Iran's oil sales constitutes a blatant violation of Article 10, and the subsequent military operations of this country against Iran also constitute a serious violation of Articles 1 and 2 of the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding." Iran's chief negotiator, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, called the sanctions reimposition and the strikes major MOU violations, and wrote on X that the era of bullying and extortion is over. The IRGC's own statement said the U.S. had openly violated the ceasefire and violated the Islamabad Understanding by launching an airstrike on a number of coastal bases and civilian stations. The U.S. officials' framing was equally specific and equally worth quoting. As President Trump and the administration have repeatedly affirmed, the MOU in effect with Iran is entirely performance-based. Iran will only reap benefits if they exhibit good behavior. The same official added, our negotiators continue to work in good faith towards a final deal. I want to hold those two things in the same frame for a moment, because they are the clearest possible encapsulation of why the MOU has produced 4 months of escalation and de-escalation cycles rather than a stable peace. The U.S. says the MOU is performance-based, meaning economic relief flows only when Iran complies. Iran says the U.S. violated specific articles of the MOU by reimposing sanctions and conducting strikes. Both sides cite the same 1.5-page document as justification for their positions. Both sides are simultaneously claiming the other broke the agreement and expressing willingness to continue negotiations. The U.S. struck 80-plus targets, and the same official said talks continue in good faith. Iran struck 85 sites in Bahrain and Kuwait, and its deputy FM cited specific article violations rather than announcing a withdrawal from the negotiating framework entirely. What this looks like, from the outside, is not a peace process with occasional ceasefire violations. It is an active war in which both sides are simultaneously conducting military operations and maintaining a diplomatic fiction that a negotiating track exists. The fiction has value for both governments. It keeps oil markets from pricing in full-scale conflict. It gives mediators something to point to. And it allows both leaderships to avoid the domestic political cost of formally declaring the ceasefire dead. But the Kharg Island strikes, the facility that handles roughly 90% of Iran's oil exports, are not the actions of a party conducting self-defense during a ceasefire. CENTCOM's own shift to offensive language confirmed that characterization had changed. The economic consequence is direct and predictable. The oil sanctions waiver revocation, combined with strikes on Kharg Island, will push oil prices back up. The gas prices that had fallen from their wartime peak after the MOU announcement are going to reverse. The Federal Reserve, which had no room to cut rates even after the deal was signed because energy-driven inflation hadn't normalized yet, now faces an Iran war that has escalated rather than concluded. Kharg Island represents roughly 90% of Iranian oil exports. That is not a marginal facility. At the NATO summit in Ankara, Trump said he was very disappointed with NATO's response to the Iran war. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said the U.S. strikes were absolutely necessary. UK Prime Minister Starmer, arriving at the summit, mentioned recent developments in the Strait of Hormuz as one of the key issues. An advisor to Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who still has not appeared in public, told press that Trump intends to attack again, and that Iran was fully prepared. That is the diplomatic picture as of Wednesday morning, a war that was supposed to have a peace deal, striking each other, while the world's largest military alliance holds a summit in Ankara, and the man who would speak for Iran has not been seen in public since he took power. Now, something that happened last night on the other side of the world that has nothing to do with any of this, but has sparked massive global sports controversy. Argentina beat Egypt in Atlanta on July 7th, advancing to the World Cup quarterfinals. However, the victory is widely being called unfair, entirely overshadowed by a glaringly biased display from the FIFA referees. The officiating was heavily skewed from the start. The referee inexplicably canceled a legitimate goal by Egypt, only to later hand Argentina a highly questionable penalty. Throughout the match, blatant fouls committed by Argentine players were repeatedly ignored. The climax of the controversy came during Argentina's game-winning counterattack. An obvious foul on Egypt's Mohamed Salah during the build-up was completely ignored by the referee, and shockingly, VAR refused to review the play. By the exact same standard the referee used to cancel Egypt's earlier goal, Argentina's winning goal should have been disallowed, and Egypt should have been awarded a penalty instead. Despite the outrage over the refereeing, ABC News documented the post-match scene. Lionel Messi was photographed being tossed in the air by his teammates after the final whistle. CNN's coverage focused on the celebration, headlining it how Messi and Argentina sent the World Cup into a state of sporting nirvana. NBC News called it a stun, with the headline, "Argentina stuns Egypt to advance to the final 8." The quarterfinals are now coming into shape across multiple matches played over recent days. Norway, who beat Brazil 2-1 in one of the tournament's biggest upsets, advances. Who beat Mexico 3-2 at the Estadio Azteca while playing the final 35 minutes with 10 men, advances. Belgium, who beat the United States 4-1 in Seattle Monday night, advances and faces Spain. Spain, who beat Portugal 1-0 in the 91st minute on a Mikel Merino substitute goal, advances. And Argentina advances after their highly disputed win over Egypt. I want to say something about Messi specifically. Yes, the refereeing last night was a disaster that arguably robbed Egypt of a fair result. But the image of Messi being lifted by teammates in Atlanta at 38 years old, in what is very likely his final World Cup, remains one of the defining images of the sport. He has 7 goals in this tournament. He has spent 2 decades being compared to Ronaldo, competing with Ronaldo, being evaluated against Ronaldo. Ronaldo played his last World Cup match this same week, losing to Spain in the 91st minute with no goals to show for it. Messi is still in the tournament, still being carried by teammates after wins, still doing the thing that has made him the most decorated footballer in history, whatever the quarterfinals produce, and despite the massive asterisk next to this victory. This image from Atlanta last night is the tournament's most talked about moment so far. And now Manhattan, because a 37-story high-rise having its columns buckle in Midtown is the kind of thing that belongs in the news regardless of what else is happening. CBS News confirmed the following. Buildings were evacuated after at least 2 support columns were found buckling at a high-rise construction site. New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani confirmed publicly that there are multiple cracks and sagging floors. NBC News' live coverage included Mamdani update after columns of 37-story building buckled. CNN's homepage described officials as confident high-rise at risk of partial collapse in Manhattan is being stabilized. The being stabilized language is the appropriate framing as of this morning. This is an active engineering emergency, not a collapse. Officials are working on it. The structure, per CNN, is being stabilized. Nobody, as of this writing, has reported casualties or a completed collapse. Those are the confirmed facts. What the situation raises, and what deserves to be asked even as the stabilization work continues, is the obvious accountability question. A 37-story building under active construction in one of the most heavily regulated construction markets in the United States should not have columns buckle and floors sag during normal construction operations. The New York City Department of Buildings has one of the most extensive inspection frameworks of any municipal construction authority in the country. When a structure of this size shows multiple simultaneous structural failures, buckled columns, cracks, sagging floors, those are not isolated incidents. They are indicators of a systemic failure in either the structural design, the construction execution, or the oversight of both. Mayor Mamdani is overseeing the response. The priority right now, correctly, is stabilization and safety. The accountability question, how a 37-story building reaches the stage of buckling support columns during construction in Midtown Manhattan under the regulatory framework that exists specifically to prevent this, is the question that follows immediately after the immediate crisis is resolved. That investigation will begin. What it finds about contractor oversight, materials quality, inspection gaps, or design defects will be the story. For now, the building is being stabilized, and the people who worked in or near it have been evacuated. Iran's ceasefire collapsed last night. 80+ U.S. strikes. Oil sanctions reimposed. Kharg Island hit. Iran striking back at Bahrain and Kuwait. And an active war, now described by the U.S. military's own press office as an offensive operation rather than self-defense. Messi was tossed in the air by teammates in Atlanta after a deeply controversial win over Egypt, and the World Cup quarterfinals are being set. A 37-story building in Midtown Manhattan has buckled columns and sagging floors, and officials are stabilizing it this morning. The first story tells you the deal that consumed 4 months of news coverage and produced a 4.2% CPI reading has not produced peace. The second tells you that the spectacle of a 38-year-old carrying a country into the quarterfinals, even amidst massive refereeing controversies, is a drama that captures the world's attention entirely outside of geopolitical logic. The third tells you that the physical world, including buildings in American cities, does not always hold when the systems designed to maintain it miss something. All three are true simultaneously. That is today.